New week, new team. At least that is what Mountaineer fans are hoping for this new week, as we are now back with another edition of Mountaineer Report presented by WVU Sports Now. Mike Asti, that's Ethan Bock, and the Mountaineers are now reeling and coming off of a disappointing, to say the least, 34-12 loss to a legit number 10, arguably number 5 Penn State Nittany Lion team, but a Nittany Lion team that took the Mountaineers to the woodshed, and that includes a hour plus weather delay that they were able to gear up and play better after that. And not much can be said about the West Virginia effort from kickoff all the way to the end of that game. So we are going to briefly recap that game and then fully put it to bed because the program has put it to bed. And we already did a couple recaps there live on the field. And then talk about what Brown said on his Monday afternoon press conference. So, Ethan, obviously a lot of hype entering that game. We previewed it ad nauseum. We said it was the longest offseason we can remember because of the hype going into this game. And you could not have asked for more on a national stage, from McAfee to Big Noon Kickoff to MGK being there. West Virginia, Morgantown, WVU won the week for sure. They got more attention, the area, the school, fans got more attention than any other program in the country until noon kickoff Saturday, when Penn State definitely took the W and put a lot of egg on the Mountaineers' faces. What's your takeaway from the results of that game? I mean, obviously they played incredibly poorly. It's about the worst effort you could see, but even for those who expected them to lose, I don't think anybody, including Brown, admitted, the rest of the coaches have admitted, Green and all the players, expected that effort in that game after all the talking and all the hype, even though Penn State is such a great team.
Yeah, that's the disappointing part. I didn't expect West Virginia to beat Penn State, but like you said, with all the hype throughout the week, McAfee's back, Pat White, Pac-Man Jones, etc. Everybody's back. It's it's almost like a homecoming week. You're on a national stage, a Big Noon Kickoff with Fox.
Mm-hmm.
Gus Johnson's calling your game. You're playing a top 10 team. And then for like the older generations, that's still an important game rivalry wise. So
kinda, yeah.
You had a lot of hype. You were hosting a top 10 team, and it's not that they lost, it's the way they lost. Right. They looked worse than last year. Even at Penn State, they looked worse than last year. So it's not that they lost. I think most people realistically expected them to lose, unless you were drinking the Kool-Aid.
I mean, a lot of people were drinking the Kool-Aid. I think that's also part of the problem. A lot of people were drinking the Kool-Aid.
And now the people that were drinking now the people that were drinking the Kool-Aid are starting to come back down to earth.
Yep.
They realize Garrett Green's not a Heisman contender.
Yep.
It's just the way they lost. They played terrible. Even if West Virginia kept it close to 3.5 quarters and they lost by a score, that's still a win. That's a moral victory. Now they can't even find a reasoning to have a moral victory.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, Ethan, because going back to last year's game, so 2023 game, and that was the first time these programs had played in 30 years. This is obviously this year's game, the first time in Morgantown since 92. But even after that game ended, and the expectations were different going into that year, West Virginia was coming off of the worst season in 20 years. People thought they'd only win 4 games. If they won 7, they ended up winning 9. It was warranting of a parade, and that jubilation would not exist. Going into this year, they win 7, they win 8. Nobody was going to have a parade. The expectations were even higher. So this is even more of a disappointment than last year's result was. However, last year, and we talked about it leading up into this game against Penn State this year, Ethan, that last year's game provided that glimmer of even an argument of a moral victory that this year's game does not. They lost by a lot last year, 38-15, 34-12. It's about the same. But because the expectations were so much greater this year versus last year, and arguably the team played worse this year at home than on the road, you could absolutely say this effort is more disappointing. And Penn State scored in the final 6 seconds last year, and I don't want to debate that again. I defended them doing it, and West Virginia was in their feelings, but that at least allowed fans to say that if you take away that, they would have covered the spread, which was arguably a moral victory when West Virginia was coming off of such a bad year. You can't even argue that this year. So, like, this year, there's not even room to have a discussion. And nobody really is with the program. It was just a really bad effort. No one's making excuses. No one seems to really know why. I think that's the only concern moving forward, that Garrett Green, Preston Fox, Neal Brown, everyone who spoke on Monday, it was all the same thing of, we played really, really bad. We were never seeing that coming. We had a great week of practice. The players said that, yeah, we celebrated, but we didn't go out drinking. We were at home. We were studying. We were not soaking in McAfee. We thought we were ready for this game. We were prepared. We just sucked. That then leaves you almost to believe, like, okay, so if that's the truth, then maybe your talent isn't where everyone thought it was. I mean, Brown even said this is a more talented team than last year, even with Frazier gone. This is a more talented team than ever he's had at WVU. But maybe that's not true. Maybe the recruiting projections and the transfer portal rankings and all of that, and what we even have with our transfer portal rankings and the portal report and all of that, maybe that's all wrong, because they're saying they're prepared, and we got 4-star kids saying they're prepared, and they just sucked. And PFF thinks Green's an NFL QB, and he was worse. So again, Penn State lost NFL players too. Chop Robinson's not there. He was there last year. So without Chop, you're worse. I mean, again, that's concerning. That, I think, is the issue with this. It definitely feels worse than last year, because Brown kept saying, okay, many West Virginia teams have lost to Penn State and even had special years. There's in West Virginia teams throughout its history that lost to Penn State and then would go ahead and win a conference title, or would have a really special year. There would be reunions for, and that's all true. That is all true. Lost to Penn State a hell of a lot, but has success throughout the program. And last year, you could even argue, was one of those years. But it doesn't necessarily feel like that's going to happen because of everything I just said, that the effort was worse, the players are supposed to be better, and you're at home. And you're claiming you were prepared and didn't soak in the limelight, and yet that's the effort.
I think the only thing I can maybe give them is, how many teams in the country could have been in Penn State's shoes, had a 2-hour plus rain delay, and then come back out and play even better than they did in the first half?
Right.
How many teams can say that? West Virginia, even though they were down 20-6, and they really should have been down 13-6, but just how does that Penn State's momentum that they gained at the very end of the half, it kind of came a little bit back just the further and further the rain delay went. Mm-hmm. And Penn State went out and still played better. So is Penn State actually that good this year to where they could win a playoff game or two?
It could be that Penn State's better than even Penn State last year. A lot of people were saying that this is the year for them.
Right. That's the only excuse I can give West Virginia if I have to reach for one. That's the only thing.
And the other excuse that exists, and a colleague and I were talking about just yesterday, and how, thank you, Lord, that next year Ren Baker's in charge of the schedule, and we don't got to talk about this anymore. But this is the last year of the double Power 4 out of conference, starting the season with a top 10 ranked team or a major program team. A lot of those games prior to this year were even on the road. This is the last year with all of that going on. And yeah, they have the Alabama game to start the year in the future. But then after that, it's all Group of 5 and FCS until Big 12 play. They got the brawl coming up after Albany. So this is the last time you're going to have this schedule even be a conversation, thank God. But that's also the other excuse out there, that maybe Penn State's better than advertised. Maybe this is finally the year for Penn State. Certainly, I don't think anyone would now be surprised if Penn State would go ahead and be a playoff team, or maybe even shock and win the Big Ten. They hadn't been able to do that. And a lot of teams out there that are looking good from week 1 or even week 0 that played no one, that if they would have played Penn State, maybe Penn State would have done the same thing to them. And we're going to start finding out as teams get harder schedules. But West Virginia didn't get a chance to ease into this. And you could certainly argue, Ethan, that if West Virginia, and I'm not saying they would do this, but if West Virginia was playing Albany in week 1 and Penn State in week 2, the out of position issues, the missed assignments, the missed blocks, even because some of those runs, even the early runs that went 10, 12 yards, Brown said they could have went 30 or 40, the drops, etc., they may not have come back to haunt them as much against an FCS team, you would imagine, as Penn State. Penn State is a legit top 10 team that's going to take advantage and just kill you. And they didn't even score off the West Virginia gets a fumble, they get a fumble. They didn't even score off of that, but it just felt like right then the vibes aren't good. Like West Virginia didn't take advantage of the opportunities when they were there. And yeah, they were in a pretty ratty visiting locker room where West Virginia is treated like kings because the disparity between home and away and what they got during that weather delay, not the same. And West Virginia, I guess, played better, but it's not like it could have played worse, and it didn't matter then. But Penn State, Singleton's 40-yard run, I mean, they just turned it on, and then right there, that was it. So the program flushed it now. I guess we're going to flush it here in terms of our coverage at WV Sports Now and on Mountaineer Report. We had to get that out there. And no matter how you slice it, I mean, again, if they would have lost 34-20, it would be 0-1 still. They still wouldn't get any votes. All of that would still be the same in terms of where they are right now. But the vibes, I think, would be better, at least, because then the schedule could come into play and they could argue, well, played a top 10 team. We would be, 1-2 if we played Kent State, wink, wink. But you can't really do that when you lose the way you did. So
they went all off season talking about how they felt slighted.
Right.
To prove everybody wrong, and you did the exact same thing you did last year at Penn State.
Yeah, and again, the effort was not better, and you were home, and you're saying that you were prepared despite McAfee. I mean, this almost is a message to the alums to pump the brakes on celebrating in too much fanfare because the team can't handle it. That's almost what it comes off of. They cannot handle a homecoming atmosphere going into a big game, maybe a big game in general, and they get their wish because none of that's going on this week. They got Albany coming to town. A good damn Albany team, by the way, not warranting all these preview shows, I'll admit. And I'm sure around the country is going to ask me a lot less to be on shows. But 11 wins. They're a really good FCS program. West Virginia plays like that against – here's how I'll end that Penn State talk, Ethan. West Virginia plays like they did against Penn State. They could lose to Albany. They could lose to Kent State that I was just trying to throw a shot at Pitt. They could lose to Kent State. West Virginia plays like that against Penn State. They could lose to anybody. They could lose to anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Brown said. It was bad football, and his exact words were, I'm not even sure we could beat a subpar team playing like that. So, again, we can argue about everything else all day and schedules and strength of schedule and what's fair and what's not. It wasn't just they lost. I don't think anyone would have been mad if they lost. The way they lost, they were never in the game. Even when the game was 13-0, I'm sitting there in the press box. There's no chance. There's no chance.
Even 13-6. Even when CJ finally got them a touchdown,
right?
He wasn't in, but
by the time I could get the damn post up, they scored themselves. You couldn't even enjoy anything if you're a WVU fan. And we can argue he wasn't in, but you could. Brown brought up that he thought the 4th and 1 didn't go his way that should have. Obviously, the fumble that was reviewed and then didn't, and maybe we'll get to at the end here briefly on what Brown said about instant replay. Again, Mountaineer Report, Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here, WV Sports Now, the outlet, and all of our coverage is there of everything we just talked about West Virginia's just disappointing effort, to say the least, against Penn State. So it's 0-1, it's Albany. I do want to then segue into, again, we're flushing it, but off of that result against Penn State and what Brown said on Monday, and now moving forward, and you can't impress anybody or prove anyone who was slurping the Kool-Aid but is now off the wagon and wants Brown fired, Ethan, I think you would agree. They could win by 70 points against Albany, even though they're a good FCS. It's not going to change anyone's mind. So this week is almost a neutral. Vibes are going to be the same going in the backyard brawl. Maybe fans get excited because of the brawl, but there's going to be a lot of pessimistic opinions going to that game now. And that's just the case. And it's because of the effort. It's not even because of the result. But Brown said, again, don't lose hope. We still got a special team. We're still a good team. We're more talented. Last year we lost, but we ended up with a 9-win year and a bowl win. Again, West Virginia teams, Don Nalens even was coach of some of them, lost to Penn State and had really, really special years that are celebrated for generations. We can be the same, and we're going to be the same. Do you buy what Neal Brown's selling right now after that effort against Penn State, or are you trusting the climb, Ethan Bock?
I'm still trusting the climb. I'm not expecting them. I'm not expecting them to do what people drinking the Kool-Aid in the offseason thought, like make the Big 12 title game. I think it's similar to last year, 8-9 wins. Right. I see his point, but at the same time, like Neal's already asking fans to not lose hope, not
it's 1 week.
It's 1 week. Like
this is like a week 4 presser.
Yeah, it's not a good sign. And if it's similar to last year with their FCS opponent, Duquesne had a solid, nice start. If it's similar to that with Albany, where Albany's up 7-0, 14-7 early on, I don't even want to be on social media. I don't want to check anything because I know what everybody's going to be saying. Yeah. Even if West Virginia, it's a lose-lose, honestly, for West Virginia this week. They're not going to gain anything if they
like the Duquesne game. They won by 30 points, but what do you remember? That they were trailing 14-10, and then there was a weather delay because it's an FCS, and you should never have that situation, even if you win big.
It's a lose-lose for West Virginia this week. Yeah. If they beat Albany by 30, 40 points, like you said, it's on the pit. Nobody's going to really buy in anymore unless they look really, really good. But even then, it's still, to a casual fan, an FCS opponent. Yeah. And if they lose.
If they lose, as we talked about before, if they lose, first of all, the site will go off the charts, so that it would at least be best for business for us in a way. I'll say that semi-tongue-in-cheek, but probably, and all my colleagues would experience the same, because it would just be lit with fans and pitchforks. And I honestly think the energy that was there in 2022, in that 5-7 year, and Brown was not fired because the buyout was the way it was, and Wren was coming aboard, and he did trust him and trust in the climb, and all of that still existed, at least with the program. And then last year was such a great year in proving doubters wrong, so he stayed. And he's a great guy. I love covering. I honestly, I think he's a good guy. But the buyout is less now. He's taking less on a salary. The contract's easier to deal with now. If he would lose an FCS game, because they didn't even lose to Duquesne with how bad it was going into that year, and that would be historic. There's not many major conference programs, certainly in the top 20 all-time ranks, that even can say that, even though Michigan's won. The conversation about Brown being fired would occur, and then I would almost bet money that Brown's probably not lasting the year, because that's a stain that you can't get rid of. Even if you beat Pitt, losing the FCS game, and it doesn't matter with the rules. We've talked about this, Ethan. They could go 0-3 and lose FCS, and if they win the Big 12, they're in the playoff. It'll be a debate, but that'll be the rules. But those are vibes that I don't think you can get over. Those are vibes that I just do not. No one will ever forget it. Beating Kansas by 20 would not make up an FCS loss. I just do not think you can do that. I don't think it's going to happen, though, to be fair. I'm not predicting an FCS loss. But as you're saying, a win isn't enough. A 10-point win is going to be treated like it's a loss to the fan base. And that's a good FCS program. So you need to really impress. You need to, before we were saying that they can use Day Farmer and get 2 or 3 TDs out of him and really get ready for the brawl and have a Hudson Clement situation and kind of beef up those over-unders for Vegas. I think number one priority is winning and showing your starters are looking really, really good. And then you worry about the rest. But they do need to obviously be able to be up by enough to see Nico and those guys at halftime. Hopefully there's no weather delay. They can't mess around like what happened against Duquesne, against Albany, and obviously they freaking can't lose. And the only way the vibes are going to flip going into conference play is not even just to beat Pitt, because again, Pitt is going into that brawl game kind of house money. Nobody's expecting much from Pitt this year, even though they have an easy schedule. If they hang with West Virginia and lose by 3, Pitt could actually argue that's a moral win on their part. And West Virginia fans are now going to expect a convincing win over the Panthers, because they probably could still go into that game as the Vegas favorite, especially if Cincinnati would beat Pitt, and that's who plays the Panthers this coming week. So in the interest of time, though, I do want to quickly get your thoughts on what Brown also said about replay. Now, he admitted this is not why they lost the game, but I thought it was a fumble on the QB that ended up being not a fumble on replay. But he also mentioned several other moments in the game, certainly that late touchdown in the first half that he thought should have been reviewed, that they didn't even try to review. And Brown basically said that if we're going to have replay, we got to use it. He doesn't get that. I was kind of confused that there wasn't that many reviews, because usually people complain there's too many. This game didn't have that many. You had one that people remember, but there were major points that weren't even reviewed. What are your thoughts on how replay is used in college football in general? And obviously Brown's a horrible messenger right now, but does he have a point?
He has a point in that the replay system needs to be used or needs to be utilized in a way where you're actually getting the calls correct. It's not like in baseball where you have a home ump, a first base ump, and then umps around the field, and they're human. Those umpires are human.
Right.
So it's for these referees to miss a call or two, that's normal.
Yeah.
But there were multiple fourth downs on both sides where like CJ Donaldson did not get in on the touchdown. There's another fourth down where his helmet crossed the plane, but the ball did not.
Okay.
They really should have looked more into end of the first half, Penn State receiver that ended up getting another touchdown for the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, and that was maybe a vibe killer. I mean, that was press box thought the game was over at that point. That was really a vibe killer.
If it wasn't the Green fumble after the Aller fumble, then it was that. But just overall, the replay system was terrible in this game. It was still in off-season form. It's good for any sport. It's just it has to be utilized in the right way, and it didn't affect the outcome of this game.
No, that's why Brown's a really bad messenger right now because he brought it up on Saturday and he brought it up on Monday. So I think Brown needs to stop talking about it. But I do get his point that he's also a part of some rules committee conversations. I'll tell you that. So maybe that's also why he's so angry. He probably heard people say we're going to do this, this, and this, and then none of it was used in the biggest game in the program for 20 plus years. And as much as it did not matter in the game, and Penn State won fairly for sure, vibes are a thing. These are kids. These aren't pros. I mean, you could argue it's more important in college than the pros because they're younger and they do have the roller coaster of emotions. If that touchdown's called back at the end of that half, Ethan, then there's a weather delay. Maybe Penn State's sitting there mad. West Virginia's sitting there really excited. 13-6 is way different than 20-6. I mean, maybe you go – now, that doesn't excuse allowing Singleton to run for 40 yards, but maybe you feel you have more of a chance, whereas maybe the West Virginia team kind of felt they already were out of it before that second half started. I'm not saying they should feel that way, but vibes do matter, and that could have switched a lot of momentum. I don't think West Virginia would have won the game, but that might have been able to lead them to score another TD and keep it respectable, possibly. And I think that's kind of what Brown's trying to allude to without saying, because he has made it clear that Penn State would have won anyway. But yeah, you could argue things are reviewed too much. I do think my pet peeve in all sports is that the rule is if there's not conclusive evidence to overturn it, you stick with the original call. Which means that if you're reviewing it for 20 minutes, then there's not enough to overturn it. Go back to the original call. It might not be what we like, but you shouldn't have to take forever to tell me that there's not enough evidence, because you should know that earlier. If you're taking that long, then clearly there's not enough evidence. But this game was weird. They just didn't use replay. I mean, this is almost old school rules. They didn't use replay hardly the one time.
To me, that's not a terrible thing, because it could be the other way. It could be like college basketball, where you're reviewing every single thing within the last 2 minutes, 90 seconds.
Right.
And it just ruins the flow of the game. Obviously, the end of a college basketball game the flow is going to get ruined anyway with free throws and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like college football, it shouldn't. Football is such a different sport in a way where you don't have to review every single little detail.
That's true.
And I like that they didn't do that, but there were a lot of missed calls.
Yeah, there has to be a happy medium, I guess. You don't want to have 15 reviews, especially in a national televised game with a lot of hype, because that's not good for the TV audience. I get it. And as you said, it can ruin games. But you also don't want to have so little that it's. I mean, even Franklin kind of alluded to some comments in that direction as well. Like, both coaches seemed like they were kind of confused. Like, what do we have replay for? We're not using it. The NFL basically, whether it's on TV or not, they're pretty much reviewing every scoring play. You could argue that, and if the college football is adopting pretty much everything else from the NFL, maybe that's something they do. Certainly, you could even have a rule that every scoring play at the end of a half, obviously end of game, end of half, maybe that has to be reviewed. If you score and then there's no time left, that maybe should be reviewed, because those are so important and can change games. That might appease a little bit. But yeah, it would have went both ways. I mean, review could have hurt West Virginia in the CJ touchdown. And even if they got that TD Penn State at the end of the first half taken away and they don't get the CJ TD, then we're at the same situation in terms of overall difference. But I think Brown has a point. But I do get why the second he said it, I wrote about it or tweeted about it, everyone was like, this sounds horrible, you're making excuses. Because he said the words, I'm not trying to make excuses, Ethan, but as I'm sure you saw, people just tuned that out and they heard that as an excuse. So it just came off poorly, and he was just the wrong messenger to be saying it. But boy, now there's a lot more intrigue on the backyard brawl, because there is a scenario, Ethan, where WVU is 1-1 with the vibes bad and Pitt is 2-0 riding high. And when we were talking 2 weeks ago, the vibes around the Pitt program were the lowest they've been since prior to Kenny Pickett, basically, where that program was off 3-9. They didn't know who the QB was. Their fans were not excited. West Virginia fans were having homecoming parades left and right with alums, MGK and everybody else there, and MGK singing Country Roads in his rendition. And now, a week later, and it has completely flipped. And it won't just be Kent State. Pitt will have a major conference win under their belt going into that game if they would beat Cincinnati. So this weekend, it'll be interesting what this weekend does to the vibes of going into the brawl. And we have seen Mountaineer teams rebound from a bad loss to open up a year, play with a chip on their shoulder, and prove doubters wrong, Ethan. What Neal Brown doesn't talk about, and yeah, there's a lot of positive history, 15th winning it, etc. There's also enough history that also suggests that teams have had big opens or have had people say that they're not good enough and been slighted, and then prove them right, and it just sucked or disappointed. I mean, 98, look at how that year ended. Not good. Not good. And all the hype going into that game. So it could go easily the other way. It's not like it's every single time that West Virginia teams just proved doubters wrong. Yeah, they have done it, but it could go the other way. And I don't think Neal can endure another one, even after 2023. So that'll do it for this edition of Mountaineer Report. We will officially flush the Penn State game now. And as I've been warning, I'm not predicting a loss, but Albany is a damn good FCS team, a damn good FCS program. So they play like they did against Penn State for 2 minutes. And, wow, the vibes will have completely done a full 180. But Pat McAfee still has hope. He said it on his show today. So he has hope. So the fans should. But I totally get the tempering of fully slurping the Kool-Aid, like everybody was slurping, or maybe some moonshine as well a couple weeks ago.